And remember 2001? It was a wonderful year if you got out early, like Mark Cuban. Whether you love Mark or think he is the most ridiculous person on the planet, he figured out the market was getting ready to turn and he got out at the top. Right in the middle of this, Goldman Sachs comes out and says, oh, by the way, guys, your portfolios are going into the tank, and we want to tell you that there are 4 countries that are going to determine the future of the 21st century: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And people said, you know, if you weren't Goldman Sachs, we'd say, you know, good grief, this is crazy stuff. First thing is that what Goldman was looking at was the rule of large numbers. And if you look at this is from the CIA World Factbook, which is a great resource. The countries with the first letter in red, by the way, are the 4 BRICS. These are big countries. And India and China have 40% of the world's population, 2 countries. Remember, our assumption was these 2 countries would be poor forever. 40% of the world's population would be poor forever. End of conversation. If you look at this list, what strikes you immediately is that with the possible exception of Russia, which claims it's a European country, although the Europeans don't claim it, there are no European countries on this list. None. And the assumptions that we made about who was going to be numero uno ignored population. It also ignored statistics. So if we look at this, we see 42% of the world's population are in these countries, 22% of the world's landmass are in these 4 countries, but most importantly, if we look at the bottom, almost a quarter of all GDP economic activity in the world is in these 4 countries. Now these countries, these 4 countries which were basket cases, now are outperforming the United States by $1.9 trillion. And the gap is getting larger. When I first did this slide, the number was $440 billion 2 years ago. Now it's $1.9 trillion. And the gap is getting larger. But more importantly, according to our CIA, not dogged CIA, but this Central Intelligence Agency, if you go to the World Factbook, the 2nd largest economy in the world using PPP, which they think is the most relevant way to compare economies, is China today. And the 4th largest economy in the world is India today. Today. Now why is that important? These are growth rates. If you look at these growth rates, with the exception of Russia, drinking a lot of vodka is not good for your economy, comrade. If you look at China and India, their economies are on steroids. Right in the middle of what? The worst economic downturn that we have ever seen since the Great Depression. And so we have an economy in China that's about half of our GDP. You have India neck and neck with Japan, having passed significantly Germany, the largest economy in Western Europe. And you have Brazil now in the top 10, and Mexico, even with all of its problems, being a major economy. Here's the thing that you need to appreciate. Goldman Sachs has said, very simply, that if China continues to grow at 5% a year, by about 2035, it'll be the largest economy in the world. Now, as Jim said, I take students to China. I'll be taking our evening MBAs to China at the end of April. I've been doing this with our students since 2003. We go to the U.S. Embassy. We talk to the Foreign Commercial Service First Secretary. And I always ask the same question. The Chinese government is predicting growth somewhere between 9 to 10% a year for the next 2 decades. Do you believe that number? And since 2003, the conversation has always been the same. We don't believe that number. My next question is, you're the eyes and ears of the U.S. government. What are you telling Washington? And they've said since 2003, we believe that the Chinese economy can grow by 7% a year for the next 2 decades. Now, if you're a banker, you know the rule of 72. You know 7% a year for the 20 years is 4x. An economy that is 4 times larger than it is today. We all are starting to get our arms around China being a major player. Try to get your head around the Chinese economy being 4 times larger than it is today. Because that's what our embassy in Beijing says is highly likely. And if Goldman is right, by 2050, the Chinese economy will be 9 times larger. And oh, by the way, China's not alone. The Indian economy. Well, let's go back and ask this simple question before we get there. So there are 2 ways to look at it. You can say, oh, gosh, that sucks. Because I remember the good assumptions. These are going to be poor Chinese running around in coolie hats and in rice fields. And at 9x, I mean, even if Goldman is off by 50%, at 4x, that's massive. Well, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a capitalist, and I believe in this country, and I think this is the greatest opportunity we could possibly have ever seen. Because we have this explosion of a whole new market for the first time. So we're at a time, strategic inflection point, Category 7 hurricane, either hurricane, where all hell's getting ready to break out in terms of opportunities for entrepreneurs, opportunities for companies that are serious about making money, but it's not going to be something that we can just do just because we want to do it. It's going to be a fight, but it's a fight I think we can win. India also is growing. Goldman says that by 2020 they're going to be neck and neck with the United States for the 2nd largest economy in the world. We will be number 2, and they will be right breathing up our you-know-what. And what makes it interesting, here a little clicker, is that Goldman is predicting that the Indian economy will be 12 times larger than it is today. 12x. That's a big number. Again, they can be off by 50%. 6x with 1.4 billion people is still a large number. What are the opportunities? It's real simple. So let's talk about that. We have never in the history of this planet seen a decade where 750 million people became members of the middle class for the first time. Never. It is happening right now. In fact, the numbers are moving as I'm talking. In China alone, the number of people in the middle class is over 100 million right now. And Goldman is predicting it's going to be 750 million for the 4 countries. Well, here's the deal. McKinsey says for China alone, the number of people in the middle class by 2020 will be 700 million people. China alone. And we're talking from rural, blue-collar, peasant to middle class for the first time in the history of their family DNA in the next decade. Now, if you can't figure out how to make money with 750 million new members of the middle class in 10 years, let us know and we will take your degree back. So you're going to have 2 little countries with 40% of the world's population, 1/5 of the world's landmass, saying, we're coming after you. And the only question is, what are we going to do? Now, there's some people who said, what we're going to do is say it's un-American, they can't do that, it is wrong, and we're going to put up some walls. Well, I have a data point, which is not on the slide because I promised I wouldn't put it on the slide, but this is a data point from one of our alums who used to work at one of the largest companies on this planet. I will not mention any names, you can probably figure out what the company was, and he said his intelligence people, when he was working at this company, showed him evidence that Chinese and Indian companies have contracts that will give them control of half of the world's natural resources by 2012. And for those of you that are mathematically challenged, that's in 2 years. Half the world's natural resources, control, by contract. That sounds really dramatic, sounds unbelievable until you spell Africa and South America. If you go to Africa, you'll see there are more Indians and Chinese than anybody else. And so what does this mean? I'm going to stop. I got other slides. You have this slide book. I'm going to stop. What does this mean? It's real simple. It means for the first time in our history as humans, we're going to look at the emergence of 700 to 800 million new members of the middle class in the next 10 to 12 years. Never before in the history of this planet have we seen so many people becoming middle class for the first time, and never again are we going to see so many people becoming middle class for the first time. This is the rule of small to large numbers. And so as frightening as this may be to some of you, because a lot of you look like you want to throw up, as frightening as this may be to some of you, this is the greatest possible time to be alive and to be a business person.